I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando. We've studied over 8,000 successful, high-growth leaders. We distill their practices and perspectives down to lessons that you can apply today.
One of the things that you and I always talk about is the For You Leaders podcast is supposed to be about the raw and the real side of leadership. It's really about the stories behind the headlines, told by the leaders that experience them firsthand. There's really no hype, just real advice that we want people to be able to learn from, and more importantly, be able to apply today.
Yeah, you're right. And today's guest is no different. Today we're talking to...
I'm Dirk Elmendorf, and I'm the CTO of Brokerage Engine.
But you probably know Dirk from the company he co-founded, Rackspace, and talk about an up and down story. You know, Rackspace started with Dirk and two of his co-founders shortly after college, and they had little business experience. They scaled really quickly, they even went public, but today they've been brought back private.
In the process, Dirk learned a lot, like any founder, anybody that's growing a company very quickly. And I want to thank him for being so honest and open along that journey in this podcast. Our listeners are going to get a real treat today. They're going to learn a lot from Dirk, how they went about building a great culture, lessons they learned about raising money, how to make sure that they truly employed and deployed customer-focused fanatics inside of Rackspace. And there's a lot more that Dirk shares in this two-part podcast. I enjoyed our conversation. I know you will too.
Yeah, Kirk, let's listen into your conversation with Dirk about how they started the company that eventually became Rackspace. It's a very, very unlikely story.
Right before I finished school, I met a guy at Trinity University, where I went to school in San Antonio, and he had dropped out to start a dial-up ISP, and so hopefully some of your listeners know what a landline phone is. But it was a slow way to get internet, and it seemed like a genius idea at the time until the big telephone companies realized it was a genius idea to be in the internet business, and it became hard to be in kind of independent company. And so I met him, and we started working on an e-commerce platform, do subscriptions and buy and sell stuff online. And this is kind of my introduction to building applications on the internet. And we started a little consulting company together called Scimitar Technology Group, which is, it's exactly the kind of terrible name you come up with when you're a couple of technical people. I often talk to people about that. One of the things that makes being a consultant great is that there's no certification. All you have to do is get a business card that says your name and consultant, and you're in the business. And the big difference between a regular consultant and a good one is if you can get somebody to pay you for your opinion, then you're a really great consultant. We raised a little money and started this consulting company, and tried to do a bunch of different stuff. And about 6 months in, we realized that part of what was missing from our formula was really business expertise. And Richard Yu is the other guy, and he was like, hey, I had a roommate my freshman year, and he graduated with a business degree. Maybe I'll recruit him to be our business guy. And so our friend Pat Condon had moved back to California, but we convinced him to come back to San Antonio and join us in this little consulting business to be the business brains. Richard was very much the hardware and networking guy, and I was all about Linux and software, and was like, okay, now we have this like perfect little team. And pretty quickly, once Pat got on the ground, he realized that he probably should have asked a few more questions about how we were doing before he uprooted his entire life. Because once a business guy wants to know, well, are we making how much money are we making? And when we kind of gave him a look, he's like, are we making money? Like, what are we doing here? And pretty quickly, Pat figured out that we were not making money. We were gonna burn through what little money we had raised. And this is a terrible place to be, to have moved to take a job at a company that instantly fails. And I remember we had this kind of like meeting where we were like, okay, what are we good at, and what do we like to do, and what can we make money at? And the funny thing is, what we really loved to do was build like complicated websites or web applications. It's a very creative process building that sort of stuff. And when we would get a job, inevitably what would happen is the customers would say, okay, we got this. Now can you make sure it's up all the time? Like, where do we go look at it? Will you host it for us? And we didn't really want to do that because that's, it's kind of plumbing. I mean, it's kind of a boring part of the business. And we're like, okay, we'll get somebody else to do it for us so we can stay on what we thought of as the sexy part of the business. And what we quickly figured out was that, nobody really would do it the way we wanted it done, which is we kind of wanted a lot of control. We wanted a lot of flexibility. We wanted them to take the blame, and we wanted them to hide that they were involved so we looked better. And nobody wanted to do that. Almost all the hosting companies we could find were immediately competing for our customer with us. Like if we host them somewhere, that company would eventually reach out to our customer and go, hey, cut this middleman out. We'll do everything for you. And that decided to pursue this business. Richard already owned the domain, and he's like, it's perfect. We're going to call it Rackspace.com because that's all you're getting. Now most people have, probably then too, but now most people have never been in a data center, and Rackspace is a very data center specific term. It's like a carburetor is a part of a very specific part of the car. Rackspace is space in a data center. It's a very geeky word for something that is super abstract now. And we, I learned now we followed the lean model. We built a website for this product we wished existed, and we put it up on the internet, and 30 days later we had 30 customers. And that was kind of the beginning of the whole ride. And it was super exciting because, in the consulting business, it's kind of like you're constantly trying to sell and convince people they have a problem and that you're the one to solve it. And this is a thing that we said, hey, we can help get you on the internet, and that our customers were already on the internet and they just wanted more of it, and we liked giving more of it. So all of a sudden we were in the hosting business, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is how, at the time we thought this is a way to make some quick money. These customers are buying servers on a monthly basis. We're gonna spend a little bit of money in the first month and the second month, and by the third month we'll have paid off all that equipment, and from then on out it's just gravy, right? Like they're just paying. I feel like this is what Apple feels like every day, right? Checks just come in from people buying apps and everything. They don't have to do anything to make that. And I learned the phrase capital intensive business, right? If you start a software company today, you and a friend and $50 will get you a cluster on Amazon. But we were buying actual hardware and putting it in actual data center space, and that got expensive fast. And what ended up happening is we grew so fast that we took what little money we had and put it all in machines, and then realized, oh my gosh, we don't have money to survive to month 2 or 3. We're going to die way before we get to the gravy portion of the show.
So yeah, keep on going, because that's one of the things I'm thinking about is at what point did you guys start to realize? Because it sounds like the thing I love about the story so far is that you guys just really found something that you're passionate about. You just kind of thought about some buddies that you knew that maybe have some skills. You threw it together, but you weren't like thinking about this overly sophisticated. Like we've got to attract this outside capital. We've got to get these multiples. We're going to have this huge exit someday. You were just trying to figure out how to make a living and do something you love.
Oh my gosh, the world then was so much simpler and so much more difficult. Like this is the thing I coach a lot of startups now, and then the challenge was like, okay, you want to form a business? Well, you got to find a lawyer, you got to do stuff, like every single step of the process. You want to be online, getting a server, finding data centers, all of that was hard. Oh my gosh, so hard. And how do you even get customers? And now when you start a business, that stuff is so easy. And the game has shifted. So where we were trying to struggle through like what I think of as like logistical challenges, modern startups have to immediately figure out, well, what is your message and how do you attract people, and how do you get on their SEO radar? It's just a very different game. And it's one of the things that in my career, I always find funny that like there are strategic things I learned during this early period, but none of the tactics survive. I feel like when I talk about early stuff, it's like, yeah, make sure you don't overwork your horses and you get new shoes for them, because it's just such a different planet when you couldn't just instantly have as much computing power as you wanted available to you. So here we are. We've we raised a little bit of money from a friend of Richard's family, and we burned through it, and I learned another important business idea called stretching your payables, which is where you just dodge your creditors and try and figure out how to make it all work. Apparently a totally legitimate business practice to just, hey, can I pay you next week when I have some money? Because I will have money eventually. And so a friend of ours was a small teleco here in San Antonio, and he said, hey guys, I got a request to wire up a building in San Antonio. You should go do that. I mean, you might be able to make some quick cash to fund what you're doing. And we were like, okay, that totally makes. I mean, if we got to crawl through air shafts or whatever, like this will be great. And at the time, we thought we had this little secret piece of information because there was a building in San Antonio that it was in terrible shape, and it was supposed to be demolished. But then the internet came in, all of the main backbones came into the city underneath this building. So it went from something you needed to destroy to the cheapest and best bandwidth in the city. And so we had a little office in this kind of like corner so we could get access to great bandwidth. And so we kind of put together this little presentation, and we could not afford a projector, so we had it printed out. We had a little flip book, and we went in to meet with the building owner, and it turned out we were going to meet with his partner. And we decided to be sophisticated business people. We're like, okay, before we show you our idea, you need to sign our NDA. And his answer was no. He's like, I've seen 10 people today. You're number 11. There is nothing magical about what you're doing. It turns out he was a lawyer, and lawyers hate signing other people's NDAs on principle, which is generally my advice to people. If someone asks you to sign an NDA, your first answer should always be no. And if they tell you anyway, they didn't deserve to have it signed. So he says, no, I'm not signing your thing. So Richard stuck to his guns. He flipped the flip book to the very last page. And he sort of said, look, this is the price. We're going to give you the best solution, but we can't tell you anything about it. But we know a lot about what to do here, and it could be a real opportunity for you. And we walked out thinking that was like a huge waste of our weekend, and what are we going to do? How are we going to find some money? And like a week later, he called to tell us that he wasn't going to do the project, which at the time we were kind of like, he wasn't going to do it with us, and he wasn't going to do it at all. I was like, okay, normally you don't call to rub it in that it's not going to happen. But he said, yeah, but just so you know, I'm an investor, and so you guys seem like you have some stuff going on. If you have any ideas and you're looking for investment, I'd love to hear your pitch. And this is 1998. There is no you can literally go on Amazon and buy a book on how to negotiate with venture capital now. There was no directory, there were no angel meetups. This was finding an investor was unbelievably impossible. And here's somebody calling us saying, "Hey kids, I do this sort of thing if you have an idea." And of course at this time we're like, "Yeah, we totally have an idea. We should put another slide deck together and go present this." And that's exactly what we did. And we were super nervous because we were talking about hosting. We were talking about about Linux, and Linux was early enough at this period that people weren't sure how to say it, let alone what it was. And we have all these graphs, and we went to go meet, and it turned out the building manager was actually the partner. His name is Morris Mittler, and his partner was Graham Weston. And they're like, okay, we'll come listen. And at the end of our kind of pitch, we're like, okay, this is really technical. And Morris was like, look, I was the first person to put all of Texas case law on CD-ROM. I had it, done overseas and then shipped all over. So I've done some software-based business. And Graham looked at the business model, and he's kind of like, I'm in real estate, but this looks like an apartment building that never runs out of apartments. That's a great business. And we kind of laughed because we were like, this is hard for us to come up with. And they instantly went, this is an idea you should really do. And it was kind of amazing. And we actually almost lost the whole deal with them because they wanted to put in some money and see where it would go. And what we had learned from the consulting the raise we did was when we raised that money, we kind of said, hey, look, we'll take some money, but we don't want any input. We'll figure it out. We're smart. What we learned from the consulting thing is we're idiots. We need as much guidance as we can get. And so part of the the thing we negotiated with Morrison Graham was we were like, look, if you put in money, you have to agree to come advise us and like spend time with us and help us build it, because it, you know, we were talking about $1 million, and it was sort of like, you have $1 million to invest. I would like to know how to get to that level. So you figured it out, like, you know, impart that wisdom. And they were kind of like, well, I don't know that, you know, we have other things. I don't know if we want to be involved. And in the end, that was a truly kind of fortuitous thing, because, you know, originally they came in, you know, once a week to talk about marketing, and eventually it was twice a week, and then eventually they moved in and, you know, they both joined the company and led it. I mean, I've read so many stories about founders or early people who are frustrated with their investors, and here are two people who played such a pivotal role. We kind of we consider them in the founding pile. So they're Pat, Richard, and I started the business, but Morris and Graham, you know, made it Rackspace.
Wow, that is an incredible story, and I love that you give them credit and can recognize that. That too is a rare thing today too. I think that sometimes people don't recognize that need for help. Well, so kind of jumping forward a little bit. Fast forward, I know you guys ended up going public, eventually went back to private, but maybe just.
I was going to say, I have the unusual distinction of having a failed IPO, a successful IPO, and a private equity buyout, all with the same company.
Yeah, that is unique. I've been a part of a couple of those, but they don't happen very often. Talk a little bit about just at a high level, because there's some other things I want to kind of dive into and get into some more specifics, but just maybe give some order of magnitude of kind of the growth that you guys had and the success you guys saw.
I mean, you know, what ends up being crazy about it is that when you grow up in an environment that grows so rapidly, it becomes hard to imagine that it happens another way, you know, everywhere else. So if you think in 1998, end of 98, December of 98, we raised $1 million. There's three founders and a fourth employee, Edwin Grubbs, who are that initial nucleus. And then by the time Apollo buys us in 2016, we're 8,000 backers worldwide. And I want to say, like, is it $3 billion a year in revenue? I mean, it's like, I left in 2009 because I grew up in a town of 6,000, and Rackspace was bigger than that. I mean, it was just like, it turned out I missed the class where you learn how to navigate that kind of structure.
Yeah. Anybody that is familiar with you guys, what you guys have done and stuff like that, I mean, it's just incredible the stories and the talent and on and on and on, the impact that your organization had. And I love the story of how it all started. I just kind of geek out on those kind of things, hearing about how ideas come to form and how they kind of grow. You know, one of the things just kind of that I've heard a lot about is Rackspace is frequently, and I think it was along the journey too, is named one of the best places to work. Why do you think that is or was?
So I think it ranked that well because we made it part of the cultural goal. One of our, you know, I mentioned that we had a failed IPO. So we tried to go public in 2000, and part of that process, we recruited a CFO named Lanham Napier in for what was supposed to be a very cushy gig, right? He shows up as a CFO, and then we go public, and it's amazing. And instead, the entire .com bust happens, and we almost go out of business. And he sort of took the helm and eventually became our CEO. And Lanham said something that has always stuck with me, and he always said that people can have to volunteer greatness. You can't make people put in their best effort. You can't, you know, beat them into submission to do a good job. You have to get them to volunteer it. And in order to do that, you have to think through the things that keep them, like, that get in their way, the things that hold them back, the things that make them feel like, hey, I shouldn't go that extra mile. You know, there's in a lot of cultural things, there's this tipping point where you think most people do it and you don't. And one view of that is that, you know, you feel bad. Hey, most people really eat a good diet, and here I am eating hamburgers. I feel bad about that. Eventually, if you're not careful, though, sometimes that can tip over, and you go, oh, well, most people are eating hamburgers. I'm a sucker for eating my salad, right? And in a lot of cultures, they don't watch over that to make sure that people feel like they're doing the right, when they're doing the right thing, that that's what you should do, and that everybody else is doing it, that you're not being a sucker for doing the right thing, that that's what's expected of you. And those high standards, when you select for them and you reward them and you recognize them, that becomes something kind of intrinsic to how people behave, and it helps reinforce it, and not in a rah-rah way, but in a real authentic, meaningful way.
So how did that show up in offsites and executive regular meetings, and just talk a little bit about how that was just part of the fabric of the organization, not just something that was a goal and you guys kind of hung up around the building?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you, Rackspace is famous for its fanatical support, and let me tell you where that started, and then I'll connect you to how that plays out in actual values. So we, in the early days, the internet was growing like crazy, so we were growing like crazy. It turned out that, when everybody was trying to get online, you didn't have to do very much to get them to buy your product. You just had to be available to take their credit card. And so as a result, we just kept hiring people, and eventually we just kept getting overloaded. And Morrison Graham said, hey, we know this guy from a local business association we're in. He does startup-y things. We're going to recruit him in to help lead the support organization. And I was super excited because I was doing that at the time. And, a lot of times I would fake an accent. So when somebody wanted to talk to my boss, they would get my quote unquote manager to yell at me. I do a terrible Russian accent where I would always be threatening to beat Dirk up for being such a lazy employee and whatever it took to get through. Right. And so this guy's name is David Bryce. He showed up, and when they said startup things, I thought, tech startup. And so I immediately started trying to engage him on the tech side, and it turned out he built a company around janitorial services. So he helped start crews that would clean buildings. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what that has to do with hosting, but we need people, so this will be great. At least I have somebody to escalate to. And so he shows up, and a couple weeks in, we get a call from a customer who was super mad. And if you do support for any time, you meet people who seem born mad. But this customer, we were supposed to have been backing his stuff up, and we had not installed it, so we'd lost data. And we had promised to fix it, and then we had done an upgrade that resulted in a downgrade, and the backup had never. He was righteously angry. And so I'm like, hold on a second, let me escalate you to my manager. And so I sent him to David, and I kind of was like, there's a hot one going to David, and I thought, this is where he goes, this isn't for me. And you could hear the customer just yelling at him through his headset. And when when it finally calmed down, he just kind of nodded. He stood up, he took off his headset, and I thought, this is where he's going to quit. This is it. And he goes, we just can't do this anymore. We have to treat people better than this. We have to be fanatical for them. And since, as you might imagine, I've told this story a couple of times, I wish I'd said, that's the idea. But I was kind of like, I don't think you can use that word in business. I don't think we want to be fanatics. It shows you what a genius I am. And we had this whole argument. We were going to have this whole argument about support and whether or not you could actually take care of people. And we were prepared to have a very rational, numbers-driven, hey, resources, that sort of argument. And when we started the argument with David, he just sort of said, look, do you want to be a liar? And we're like, what? He goes, well, if you sell somebody something and you don't stand behind it, you're a liar. Do you want to lie to people all day? Do you want to lie to each other? Do you want to lie to all the employees we hire? What do you want to do? Do you want to lie? And there's no way to answer yes to that. There just isn't. And as soon as he had us saying yes, he's like, okay, what don't you like? And it was like, well, I hate when I have to call 5 times to get something sorted, or people don't know what I'm doing, or all this stuff. And he was like, we're just going to fix them. We're just going to fix them one at a time, and we're going to do that. And it sounds so simple, but much like, a marathon is going one direction for 26.2 miles. That sounds simple until you do it. This is the same sort of thing. And throughout Rackspace's history, that idea of, really caring for the customer got tested time and time again, and we had to live up to it. Sometimes we screwed up, and we had to, call the customer and tell them. Like, I remember I was at an event, and a customer came up to me and said, my organization does NGOs all over Africa. Their back office is hosted in my application at Rackspace. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. He goes, you guys deleted my entire mail spool. And I was kind of like, well, you want to punch me in the face or the stomach? And he's like, well, I was mad at the time, but you guys didn't point fingers. Like, you helped us put it back together. You explained how the mistake happened, and like, I'm still a customer. And I was like, well, that it told me how much credit in the bank we had. And in '06, every year Lanham had a goal for the company. So like, not long after the .com bust, we had our very first one called Project Profit, which was to make money. Which, it sounds funny today that you have to make making money a goal of a business, but it was the .com era. It was a different world. It's probably due for that again any day now. But in '06, we were growing like crazy, and we decided it was called Go Bold. And we decided, okay, if we just grow as much as we can, how much is that? How many more customers can we put on? How quickly can we expand? And I will never forget, we were in an offsite. It was March. All the leadership of the company was in the room. And Lanham stood up and he said, who here thinks Fanatical support is in jeopardy? And everyone raised their hand. And he said, me too. And we spent the entire offsite figuring out, how do we get the business back to delivering what it's supposed to do? Like, we had new salespeople who were like, hey, guess what? You have no quota for the next 2 weeks. Like, go do something. Like, we just got to we got to slow this down, because once we lose it, we'll never get it back. And at the time, I was caught up in the kind of emotion of it, but now looking back, I realized what an incredible business moment where you were doing the right thing. I mean, you doing the right thing and making the long-term right decision, right? And that there were many, I've now been in that room with companies where they didn't want to look at anything else. They just wanted to look at how much money we're going to make, and hopefully they would survive it. And it was pretty magical to be in a place where they were willing to risk things because that's what the culture was about.
I love hearing the stories of how entrepreneurs really came about founding the companies that they've started and grown. The best are always born out of some kind of frustration or not being able to find a solution for a problem that they were having. And so I'm always curious to hear kind of what the impetus was to them starting a business. And the story is really no different at Rackspace. Think about your business. Are you focusing on creating customer-focused fanatics? I love that Dirk said that once you lose your customer's focus, it's nearly impossible to get back. Do you agree with that? It's one thing to say that you're fanatical. It's another thing to really live up to it in your daily routines, in your cadence, in how you interview, how you promote, all those things. It really does show up in the details of each day. You can't just say you have it. You actually obviously have to back it up. And I love that, how Dirk shared that and gave some specific examples about how they went doing that. You never lose by doing the right thing. Sometimes it's hard to, and it's not obvious maybe what the right thing is, but I think when you've got enough people that are focused on the outcomes and focused on taking care of the customer, the right thing bubbles up inside of an organization. I just know you'll never regret that. I really don't want you to miss the next interview with Dirk. We originally reached out to him because we had heard about his approach to interviewing and how great he is at asking questions and kind of his philosophies and ideas around interviewing. And he explains his unique approach and provides some real world tips that you'll be able to start applying immediately after you listen to the next podcast. He answers the age-old question of, is the customer always right? It's a provocative question, and he has a unique approach to it. So I'm going to strongly encourage you to hear his answer to that question and much more that Dirk provides in our next episode of the For You Leaders podcast. Until next time, thank you for listening.